All right, let's see what we got here. Oh man, I'm not a big recipe guy. We're just gonna make this happen. First of all, we gotta get those bathroom walls up. So a little bit of bathroom walls. You're gonna need just a little bit of the plumbing right behind the walls so we can lock those walls down. All right, let's give that a stir. Overcab cabinet. You don't wanna overdo this one. You gotta get those latches on the door. A little pinch of salt. Yeah, this is just salt. That's just salt, guys. And positive energy and affirmation. You guys are doing great. Okay. Well, I need a lot of that. You're gonna need a lot of that because I hope that's enough. Wow. Just that. And that should be good. Oh, that's perfect. That is one tasty episode. You guys are gonna really like this. Episode 10. Here we go.
Right across this country into the starlight, 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
This is episode 10, and we are covering a bunch of smaller jobs in this episode. So we're putting up the bathroom walls, finishing some of the bathroom plumbing. We are doing the initial install of our Dickinson P1200, not the full propane install, but getting it up on the wall. We are also making our overcab storage cabinet. Finally getting the latches and locks on our Wildlands door. And we are also completing our overhead storage situation with an open shelf.
Sounds like a lot. Let's get right into it. First up, bathroom walls. This was nice. 90-degree angle, not a curved bus. Pretty straightforward. Just had to cut a couple big rectangles, size them up. There is a very slight angle at the top, so we did have to trim it down after, but nothing like trying to scribe a curve and all that and testing and cutting. This is one of the real big perks of building in a square box, you know, where you have 90-degree angles. It just makes all those cuts a lot easier.
I wanna get high on, caught by surprise by you. Want you to make my heart feel as much as I know it should.
With the boards cut, we just put them in place for the time being, so when we're ready for the full install, we will lock them down. That being said, I did want to get the plumbing behind the front wall completed, so when we are ready to do the bathroom, we can just get at it. So all the connections have been made. I'm using 1/2-inch PEX again. I installed the elbow angles to get from behind the wall over to the mixer valve, which goes up to the shower head. So that is already locked down, which is really nice. And when we get to that step, we won't have to think about that. Also on that wall, we cut the hole for where the shower head will come out and also the handle for where the mixer valve is so you can operate the shower.
In episode 6, when we put up our plywood walls, you can see that we ran the PEX behind that wall. That's really the only concealed part of the water system. And we did that because the lines have to go behind the shower wall. Otherwise, they would run right through the shower and you would see them. So we ran those behind the wall, kind of angled them up towards the top, and now Drew is able to just bring those over to where the shower handle and the shower head will be.
Behind that shower wall, we really like to install a couple shut-off valves in case you need to change the shower head or just shut the water off for some reason to work on something. So there's a valve for the hot and the cold. I used PEX cinch clamps and actually got a new PEX tool, which is really nice. It has like a lock and then indicator feature, so it is ratcheting and it will lock and not release until you complete the full action. So you like basically can't under crimp them. It goes just the perfect size, a little light comes on, and then you flip this switch and it releases.
It is pretty fancy.
It is fancy. One of the benefits to doing this plumbing ahead of time is you have all that space to work in, as opposed to being behind the wall and trying to reach around with the tools before that board is in place. If you do all that work then just put the board on with the holes cut in it. You can make your connections, and it was pretty easy to work in that spot because there's nothing up there yet. Cabinet hadn't been built, and I recommend if you can do it ahead of time, do it ahead of time.
There is a lot more to come with these shower walls when we do the full bathroom install, and that will be a full episode of its own because that involves our custom shower pans. We'll be tiling the FRP board on the walls, so we will put a full episode of just the bathroom out down the line. But right now we're completely set up for a really straightforward bathroom install, just having these walls and the plumbing in place. If you have seen any of our builds, you have probably seen this crazy looking silver rectangle on the wall, and that is the Dickinson P1200 heater, and we've also installed the P9000 in one of the buses as well, just a smaller version of the P1200. We really love this heater. It's a marine propane heater, and it has that beautiful little fireplace front on it for tons of ambiance.
Yeah, one of our favorite parts of the build by far. It just makes it feel really comfortable and cozy in there.
So you may have predicted that we were going to install this Dickinson P1200 just like the other buses because you saw us cut a giant hole in our roof for a chimney that involved kind of making sure that our solar accounted for that chimney. So we talked about that in past episodes. You may have seen this coming, but we really do love this Dickinson marine heater, so I couldn't imagine not including it.
Yeah, if you have the space, it's kind of hard to imagine not putting it in there. So once again, here we go. We weren't ready for the full propane install yet, but this is one of the components in the build that you have to kind of prep as you go. So first off, we needed to know where the hole for the chimney was going to be in order to do the solar. So we already figured that out a few weeks back, but now we wanted to get it on the wall, make sure the chimney was going to make the angle, and know where the propane has to come up to feed that. It's all kind of got to be planned ahead of time. It will be pulled on and off a few more times before it's finally locked in, but you do have to think about this ahead of time.
This heater and the chimney really just affects everything around it, so having it on the wall is a great reminder for everything you're building in that whole space that you need to account for the chimney. In this build, the chimney will be coming up and then going over, so it's kind of a funky little curve there. We just wanted to make sure that we were taking it into consideration with everything else we were designing. The first step for this process was to get our horizontal support beams into the bathroom wall that we built several episodes ago. These are just the studs that the heater is going to be screwed into, so we waited to place those horizontal supports until we knew the exact height of our heater. Otherwise, the heater is just getting screwed into the plywood wall, which is not very good support for a pretty heavy appliance hanging on the wall. So we measured the height of the heater and where it mounts into the wall and screwed in those supports right at those exact measurements. Then we cut a piece of 1/2-inch ply that will be the wall behind the heater and screwed that into place as well. Once the plywood wall was in place, we held up the actual heater and screwed it through the wall and into those studs, so now it's up on the wall.
You can now size up the chimney by feeding it out to the hole out the roof where it needs to go, and you can mark the excess that comes out of the roof and then cut that back so the chimney top cover piece fits perfectly flush on the roof. You can screw it down and there's going to be no leaks.
We didn't do the full chimney and deck cap install right now, but that will be coming up in the future, probably when we do the final propane and electric install for this heater. So we'll finish that install then.
Now the heater is ready for the propane install and to be wired to run the fan on it. So when we get to those steps, will just be a couple connections and it will be ready to go.
Now we are moving right along to the next area this week, and that is the over cab compartment. This is by far my least favorite part of the entire build. In every vehicle, this space is just a little bit different. We're grateful to have the storage space, but it can be tough to fit some sort of cohesive cabinet into this space. By far my least favorite, so I wanted to get it out of the way early.
Yeah, you start dealing with strange shapes, and usually there isn't much support up there for any kind of framing, so you kind of have to do some problem solving And like she said, each one is going to be different. It's definitely unique to the vehicle.
My big goal with this front area was to keep the entire cabinet as light as possible, so I used some scrap wood that I actually had laying around and kind of made a sort of shelf that would set into this whole area. So there's a bottom part and then a top bookshelf above it to use this really awkward triangular area that we have at the top. That's part of the hurdle of this whole area, is using each little space, using everything that you have can result in some really awkward little storage spaces, but still useful.
Yeah, this very much brings us back to like bus building, because the bus is a lot of those kind of things. This is the only one in this vehicle, but it does seem like we're back in the bus building.
With that main shelf structure set into place, it got a piece of plywood on top of it to complete that bookshelf part above everything, and that got secured right into the compartment. Overall, this cabinet will have sort of a garage area to the left behind the bathroom wall. You could probably keep some tools back there. Overall, it's just going to be unfinished, the insulation and the shutoff valves for the plumbing. Then there's a main compartment right in the middle, and this is nice and finished inside. There's going to be a drawer to the right of that, and then another small kind of rectangular storage on the far right side. And then above everything is that little bookshelf at the top. We cut a big piece of plywood to the full size of the cabinet face, hung it up, and then drilled big holes where each compartment would be, big enough that I could get my hand in there and trace the inside of each of the compartments. Then we took the face back down and cut the holes based on those measurements that we traced on the inside. We used a jigsaw to cut out these holes, sanded everything down really nice. Then we took the plywood face, screwed it back in place to the framing around it, and right back into that shelf structure that we built inside the cabinet. It looks really great when this face goes on. Before the face, it looks kind of crazy with this weird shelf thing in there, but as soon as you put the face on, it looks really polished, and you can see each individual compartment. Once the face was on the cabinet, we kind of looked at it and decided that the shelf needed a little extra bit of framing just for that really nice finishing touch. The rest of the compartments will get doors or drawer faces. Those will probably be shaker style or maybe with the cane. Haven't really decided yet, but that shelf needed a little bit of flair of its own.
Yeah.
Coming up for this cabinet, of course, will be paint on the face, and then we're also going to add lights because it is pretty dark inside the cabinet. So once Drew does the wiring of the whole vehicle, then you'll be able to see inside those compartments. And of course, we have the doors and drawers coming up for that too.
Yeah, keep in mind if you want to do any kind of lighting inside cabinets and stuff, just to have the wire in place, and then when you're ready to connect it back to distribution, you'll already have it in place. You're not trying to fish it through a wall. It's there and ready to go.
There's still a little bit of work coming up on this cabinet, but the bulk of it is finished, and that feels really good.
A few episodes back, we installed our Arctic Tern Wildlands door, but it had a few things we still needed to do. First off, it was in there, and we noticed the wind was blowing it around. So we had planned on putting some sort of catch on the outside. Knew it was time to get to it because you don't want that thing banging into the vehicle. So we ordered this door catch where it's two pieces. One is mounted to the outside of the vehicle, the other to the door, and it sort of fits into the piece that's on the vehicle. Right away the first day, not hearing that back and forth. It was like, okay, this thing is good. Another one of those things, be very careful when you're sizing this up because you don't want to put extra holes in your vehicle. Depending on the structure you're building in, you may have to reinforce the inside. This, much like most shuttle buses, has fiberglass, so just screwing into the fiberglass, we knew that wasn't going to hold up. So behind the fiberglass inside, we reinforced it with a couple wood boards that we screwed into and also locked those into the floor and the framing there. As soon as we did that, it firmed it up. It felt really good. You definitely don't want to leave that just the fiberglass. It'll just rip out over time. So back it up and it's going to be really strong. It felt great as soon as we did that.
It was definitely necessary.
Simple process here. We just marked it, drilled the holes, added the butyl tape, screwed it into the vehicle, screwed it into the door, gave it a test, and luckily we got it right the first time, and it looks really good. It fits good, and I'm really happy with it.
The catch itself is rigid enough that it keeps the door open, but it's not so tight that it's putting an unnecessary amount of stress on the door or the side of the vehicle. It really kind of hits that sweet spot of being just tight enough that it'll keep the door in place even with wind, but when you're pulling it out to close the door, you're not stressing out that door or the fiberglass on the side of the vehicle.
If you remember when we installed this door and did the water test, there was a slight bit of water that was getting in, and what we saw was the seal on the door was not being compressed enough. Well, we hadn't installed the deadbolt locks yet, and that was the last step to complete this installation. This door has 2 deadbolts, an upper and a lower one, and they have to be screwed directly into the frame of the vehicle or the framing around that door. So whether that is metal or wood, whatever you have to screw it into it, and then it has a L-type bracket that the deadbolt screws into and locks into. At that point, it's secured into the internal part of the wall and the framing of the vehicle. So it's super strong and completely concealed, so you can't mess with it with a screwdriver or anything from the outside. As soon as we got this installed and I locked it in, it pulled the door in so much tighter. I was like, yep, that was the problem we were having. Now it's good. You may have to fine tune just how tight it is depending on the depth of your wall. I did have to adjust it a few times. I actually had it too tight at first. I couldn't quite close it all the way, so I had to go back and loosen a couple of the screws and move the bracket over. So you'll have to do this based on what your vehicle is, but there's an easy adjustment to be made. You can change that at any point.
You could physically see the door pull itself in once Drew installed these latches. As soon as you pulled the handle and they locked in place, you could see the whole thing come into the side of the vehicle. So that was definitely our issue with some of the mist coming in the screen door. Feels really good to have that all fixed up and in place, and now the door is 100% installed. It looks really great. We're still really happy with the Wildlands door. You may have noticed when we built our overhead cabinets that we only built 2 of them, and in our past builds we have had 3. So there's one that would usually go over the heater and the couch that's currently missing. We like to shake things up a little bit, try new things, so I was interested in doing some sort of open shelving situation over top of the couch instead of a completely closed in cabinet. Now there's nothing wrong with the cabinet, it's not that we didn't like it, I just wanted to try something new. The problem with open shelving in a vehicle is obvious. You're driving, and if it's completely open, things are gonna just fly off of that shelf every single time you get in the driver's seat. So it was very important to have some sort of lip or edge barrier around this shelf. But overall, I just wanted to keep this shelf design really simple, clean looking, and I wanted it to match the rest of the aesthetic of the build. And a big element that we have going on here is the cedar ceiling, and this shelf will be right up against the cedar, so I bought a few more cedar planks and I wanted to just match all of that wood.
When trying to figure out how we were going to secure a shelf like this, we had to think about, okay, we had our metal in place, but this wasn't the plan from the beginning, so we didn't weld in any sort of threaded rod or something you could easily connect to. But there was an easy solution that also adds a really cool look. So we went ahead and got some black pipe with the plates that you screw it into. Now you can just buzz the plates into the ceiling, screw the pipe in to the length you want, screw that down into the other plate that's connected to the shelf, and it solves the strength part of holding it up there, and it looks really interesting.
The first part of this was to cut the plywood for the very bottom piece of the shelf. Then I cut the cedar strips that will go along the outside of the shelf, just trying to match it really to the ceiling so it's not a completely different type of wood and it looks out of place. We also didn't want it to be that same teal color. We wanted it to kind of be its own element. So the cedar with the black pipe is a totally new element of the design, and and I think it fits in really well. I screwed the flanges onto each ends of the pipe and then lined them up where they needed to go on the shelf. This is where we had to trim the flanges so that the pipe would be right up against those cedar strips on the outside of the shelf. Once they were trimmed, the pipe now fit completely flush in the corner and the other ones fit right against that edging. It looked a lot better having them right up against the edge rather than inset into the shelf. I spaced out the cedar strips evenly on the outside of the shelf, glued and used brad nails on the bottom one to keep it in place against the plywood. And then the top strip of cedar went in place against the pipe using a pipe hanger strap, and those just got screwed in place, and it tightens around the pipe, so it just holds that piece of cedar tight against the pipe so it can't move around.
Another step in the installation of this shelf was making sure there was passage for the chimney. Now it's at a bit of an extreme angle because we wanted that heater centered as it could be, but we also want the chimney as far to the left on the roof so there's room for the solar panels. So there's kind of this weird angle it has to make up. So we kind of were looking at the board. We thought about cutting a big U shape into it, but after sort of measuring it out, I realized I had that 5-inch hole saw sitting there. And just a hole saw cut is just going to look a lot cleaner than like some random shape coming off the wall. So we lined it up, marked it, used that 5-inch hole saw, cut this nice big hole, and now the pipe sort of feeds in at an angle, but it doesn't touch either side. There's a nice gap. In the future, we will probably put a little metal sleeve on there just to be safe, but it was like just the right size for the angle of the pipe, and it just lets it pass through, and it looks pretty cool.
Another thing to consider here is that the pipe screws in on each end to the flange. So you have to make sure that each of these shelf supports are the exact same height. We realized that one was maybe a 1/4 inch higher than the one next to it, and that's just going to result in a really uneven shelf once you screw it up on the ceiling. So we removed each of those supports, put them in the vise, and just really cranked down on them. Make sure they were all screwed in the same amount and that they were each the same length. Once they were all the exact same length, we reinstalled them back onto the shelf, put the cedar strip around the edge, and then it was time to actually install the shelf. This is the same process as those overhead cabinets. We held it up into place. Everything was measured out perfectly so that these pipe supports were going right up where we had a furring strip and reinforced metal framing. So again, this shelf is going directly into the metal framing of the vehicle, and that's going to be its strongest point.
Yeah, and on this one, like I had mentioned about the shelves before, if you have a shallower shelf, you have trouble getting the drill in there. Now, on two sides, it was pretty easy because we actually could angle the drill just slightly from the outside of the shelf. But the last one was tricky. I had trouble getting that screw in. I had to end up getting like a short impact screwdriver, and luckily it was enough for us to just buzz it in there. But yeah, I couldn't get the drill in there. So you got to think about that for sure. You might have to get some funky tool. Luckily, I got it to catch. It's good to go.
The shelf was up, secured against the ceiling, and this was the first time we could really step back and look at it in the context of the whole vehicle. I plan on putting some matching baskets up there, maybe a book, a plant or two. I really love the idea of the organization of the baskets up there and that you can actually see them. You could see the plants or the bookshelf. I think it's a really interesting element of the build and something that we've never done before.
That brings episode 10 to a close. Lots of parts, lots of ingredients, but it's looking good.
It was a bunch of smaller things that really needed to be done before we could move ahead with a few larger projects. That's it for episode 10. Thanks so much for being here with us, and we will see you next time.